Everyone wants to tell you about how much money they've made from their wins in the card market, but after selling well over 7 figures of sports cards, I can tell you I've learned far more from the investments that didn't work out. And over the years, I've made it a habit to regularly look back at my winning and losing investments to see what worked, what didn't, and what I could learn from them. And as I kept looking back at the cards I lost money on, I started noticing the same pattern over and over again. Once I understood what it was, it completely changed the way I think about card investing. Now, most people believe successful card investing is all about picking the right player at the right time, and on the surface, it makes perfect sense, right? If you could buy Shohei Ohtani before he was the face of baseball, or Patrick Mahomes before everyone knew he'd be the NFL's next great quarterback, you'd probably make a lot of money, right? That's the dream, and every once in a while, someone actually pulls it off in the card market and wins big. The problem is this is far easier to talk about than to actually do it. So think about this for a second. We've got professional scouts who spend their entire careers evaluating talent, and there are front offices out there investing millions of dollars trying to identify future stars, and they still get it wrong all the time. Think about how many first round draft picks over the years became total busts, or how many former top prospects just never panned out. And if there are people whose full time job is evaluating athletes and even they can't predict the future, it probably shouldn't surprise us that card investors also struggle with this. And when I look back at my own investments, especially the ones that didn't work out, it made me see that I wasn't immune to this either. I've had investments where I did all the research and I thought I had done everything right, but ended up completely missing on the player. I've also bought cards of players who went on to be stars in the league, and I still didn't make the kind of money I expected on some of those guys. Ultimately, I realized my problem was that I was asking the wrong question before I ever bought the card. Now, here's what my losing investments actually taught me. So, as I started looking back through different cards that I didn't make money on, there was one thing that became obvious. The losses that bothered me the least were the ones where I still believe I made a good investment decision, but it just didn't work out. So for example, maybe I found a card with legitimate grading upside and I checked the condition and sent it off for grading and it just came back a 9 instead of a PSA 10 that I needed. That happens, right? That's just part of the grading game. Now, do I enjoy losing money? Of course not. But if I were looking at that exact same card under the exact same circumstances today, I'd probably still make that same investment again because I still believe it was the right play based on the information I had at the time. So I can live with that kind of a loss. Now, on the flip side, the losses that frustrated me the most were different because those were the investments where my success depended almost entirely on something that I couldn't control. And seeing this pattern is when everything started to click. I just wasn't going to build a consistent card investing business by getting better at predicting the future. If I wanted consistent profits, I needed to get better at choosing strategies where my own skill had a bigger influence on the outcome. And from that point on, the trajectory of my card investing business completely changed. So here was the big shift. The key was to stop trying to choose the right players and start choosing the right strategies. And today I don't evaluate investments by asking which player I think is going to have the best career. Instead, I'm asking which strategy gives me the greatest opportunity to lean on my own skill. Now, when you look at the card market, every single strategy falls somewhere on what I call the spectrum of control. So on one end are the strategies that depend heavily on predicting the future or other things that are just completely outside of our control. So this includes things like betting on player performance or trying to identify the next superstar before everyone else. Now on the other end of the spectrum are strategies that let me rely much more on my own skill. So this is things like grading or understanding how to use the seasonal market timing strategy or understanding how to find quick flip opportunities by identifying below market value buys. Let me show you what I mean here. So let's say I buy a promising rookie because I think he's going to become the next superstar in the league. And at first glance, this probably seems like a perfectly reasonable investment, right? You buy the player, you think he's going to be better in the future, and if you're right, you make a bunch of money. But hold on for just a second, and let's think about everything that has to happen for me to actually make money on that play. So first of all, I have to buy the right card at the right time. The player has to go out and perform above the market's expectations for long enough for the market to notice. The player has to stay healthy. The market still has to actually care enough for values to climb. And all of that has to happen within a time frame that actually makes sense for my investment. Now, if I'm right, I might actually end up making a bunch of money on this investment. But notice how almost every single variable that determines whether or not I win is completely outside my control. Now let's compare that to a grading play. So instead of asking whether I think the player is going to be the next MVP of the league, I'm asking a completely different set of questions. Is the card centered? Are the corners clean? Does the surface look good? Do the grading numbers actually make sense? Is there big upside? What's the expected value if it gets a 10? And remember, I can still lose money on a grading play. For example, the card might just come back a 9 instead of a 10. But if I invest the time to develop the learnable skill of grading, that gives me an enormous amount of influence over that outcome. And grading also gives us a predetermined timeline. So once again, we have control. Now, keep in mind that neither strategy guarantees success. There's always risk when we invest in anything, but the difference is that one essentially requires me to become a better fortune teller, but the other one requires me to just get better at a skill. One of those is way easier and more valuable than the other. Now, I still buy players that I believe in, and I probably always will, but the difference is I recognize those plays for what they are, which is speculation, and I'm okay with accepting the risk of those plays now. And the other thing is, those investments are also built on top of a business that's already generating consistent cash flow, and that means I don't even need them, they're just a nice bonus when they happen to pay off. So if we zoom out, there are really two parts to this. So first, we use the controllable strategies to create consistent profit and cash flow. And second, we use the cash flow to make calculated investments to get exposure to undervalued players or players we believe have upside. Now, one thing that's always appealed to me about the card market is the idea that profits can compound as you reinvest them. But one of the things that I didn't appreciate early on in my journey is that skills also compound. So think about it. The first time you submit cards to PSA, you're probably going to miss a few things and get some 9s or even some lower grades. But after you've evaluated hundreds or thousands of cards, you're going to start to notice things that a newer grader would never notice. And that's what makes this approach so powerful, because every single time we use one of these strategies, we get a little bit better at it, and those skills continue paying us back for as long as we stay active in the market. Cards will come and go, but the skills we build are ours to keep forever. So what does it look like to actually apply this? Well, one framework I teach is called the why-when framework, which is that for every investment, we need to have a clear reason why we believe the card's value will rise and a realistic timeline for when we think it'll happen. But if you're trying to build regular cash flow with cards, there's another question that's just as important. So ask yourself, how much of this outcome is actually within my control? Because the more we can lean on our skill, the more consistent our results are going to be. At the end of the day, I want to build my business around situations where I'm betting on myself instead of somebody else's future. Guys, one of the biggest lessons that sports cards have taught me is that the more I focus on the things that I can control, the less I find myself worrying about the things that I can't. Now, building these skills takes time and reps, and you can absolutely figure it out on your own, but that's also the slowest and the most expensive way to learn because every single mistake costs you actual time and money. And so inside my card investing community, Ignite, we focus on the controllable strategies we talked about in this video, things like grading and timing and finding value, evaluating deals, and building the skills that lead to consistent results. And as you're learning and taking action, you've got me and an entire community of hundreds of fellow card investors helping you so you don't have to figure everything out by yourself and you never get stuck along the way. If you'd like to check it out, there's a free trial linked in the description where you can have a look around and see if it's a good fit for you. But otherwise, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.